After my husband's funeral, my sister-in-law drove me to a remote road and said, "This is where you get off. The house and business are mine now." She spat before speeding away. Stranded, penniless, I clutched my bag, then smiled. She thought she'd won. But she didn't know what I'd done before her brother died. "I'm sorry for your loss, but we need to discuss business." Those words, spoken while David's casket was still being lowered into the ground, should have prepared me for what was coming. Rachel had pulled me aside during my husband's funeral, her manicured hand gripping my arm like a vice, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The transition needs to happen quickly." David wouldn't have wanted the company to suffer because of sentiment. I stared at her in disbelief. My husband had been dead for exactly 4 hours, and she was already planning to take everything we'd built together. ## heading 1. The perfect storm builds. I should have seen it then, the way her eyes flickered with something that wasn't grief. But I was drowning in my own sorrow, barely keeping my head above water as friends and family offered their condolences around David's grave. The October wind cut through my black dress, and all I could think about was how David would have made some joke about Chicago weather to lighten the mood. He always knew how to make me smile even in the darkest moments. But there would be no more smiles from David. No more late-night conversations about expanding our business. No more stolen kisses in our home office when we thought no one was looking. Rachel's grip on my arm tightened, pulling me back to the present. "Maya, are you listening? This is important." I looked at her, then really looked at her for the first time in years. David's sister stood there in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her blonde hair was styled flawlessly despite the wind, her makeup unsmudged by tears. She looked like she was attending a business conference, not burying her brother. "Rachel, please," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "Can we talk about this later? I can't think about business right now." Her smile was razor-thin. "Unfortunately, business doesn't wait for grief, Maya. Collins Tech Solutions needs leadership, and David left very specific instructions about what should happen." That was a lie. I knew it was a lie because David and I had updated our wills together just 6 months earlier. We'd sat in our attorney's office, holding hands while we discussed what would happen to our company if something happened to one of us. The business would go to the surviving spouse with provisions for key employees. Rachel wasn't mentioned in any business capacity. But standing there in that cemetery with dirt still falling on my husband's coffin, I didn't have the strength to argue. I nodded weakly and let her lead me away from the grave site, away from the small group of mourners who were beginning to disperse. It hadn't always been like this between Rachel and me. In the beginning, I'd actually hoped we might become close. When David first introduced us 16 years ago, I was eager to be part of his family. I'd grown up as an only child, and the idea of having a sister was appealing. I remember that first meeting so clearly. David had been nervous, adjusting his tie 3 times before we walked into the upscale restaurant where Rachel was waiting. She was already seated at the best table, checking her phone with an air of practiced impatience. "Rach, I'd like you to meet Maya," David had said, his voice warm with love and pride. "The woman I've been telling you about." Rachel had looked up from her phone, and I'd seen her take inventory of everything about me in about 3 seconds. My off-the-rack dress, my modest jewelry, my nervous smile. I'd felt like a specimen under a microscope. "So you're the receptionist," she'd said, not even trying to hide her dismissal. "Actually, I'm David's business partner now," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Her laugh had been like breaking glass. "How sweet. You're playing office." David had jumped in then, explaining how I'd helped him recover crucial data, how my organizational skills were transforming his chaotic one-man operation into something sustainable. But I could see Rachel tuning out, already deciding I wasn't worth her attention. Over the years, that dismissive attitude had only grown worse. At every family gathering, every holiday dinner, Rachel found ways to remind me that I was an outsider. She'd talk about family memories that predated me, use inside jokes I didn't understand, and consistently refer to the Collins family business, as if I weren't sitting right there. David tried to shield me from it, bless him. He'd change the subject when Rachel got too cutting, or create excuses for us to leave early when the tension became unbearable. But he also made endless excuses for her behavior. "She's just protective of family," he'd say during our drive home from yet another uncomfortable dinner. She'll come around once she gets to know you better. But Rachel never wanted to get to know me better. What she wanted was for me to disappear. The irony was that while she was treating me like an unwelcome guest, David and I were building something extraordinary together. Our tech consulting firm had started in my tiny studio apartment, with David coding on an ancient laptop while I handled client calls from my kitchen table. Those early days were magical in their own way. We'd work 18-hour stretches fueled by coffee and shared dreams, debugging software while sharing stories about our childhoods. David would explain complex programming concepts while I taught him about cash flow management and client psychology. We were perfect complements. His technical brilliance paired with my business instincts. Our first major client was a small medical practice that needed a better patient management system. David built something beautiful and functional, but it was my suggestion to add automated appointment reminders that really sold the contract. That little feature, born from my understanding of human nature, became a signature element in all our subsequent projects. By our second year, we'd moved to a proper office space and hired our first employee. By year 5, we had a full team and clients across 3 states. By year 8, Collins Tech Solutions was valued at $12 million, with a client list that included hospitals, financial firms, and government agencies. Through it all, Rachel watched from the sidelines, cycling through her own failed ventures while criticizing ours. She'd gone through a boutique clothing store, a high-end catering business, an organic skincare line, and most recently, a wellness retreat in Malibu. Each failure was followed by a phone call to David, asking for another loan to get back on her feet. David always said yes. It was one of our few sources of conflict. "She's family, Maya," he'd say whenever I gently suggested that maybe continuous bailouts weren't helping Rachel learn from her mistakes. "She just needs the right opportunity." I bit my tongue, but privately I thought Rachel's real problem wasn't lack of opportunity, it was lack of commitment. She treated businesses like expensive hobbies, moving on to the next shiny idea whenever the current one required actual work. 6 months ago, she'd shown up on our doorstep after her latest failure, looking uncharacteristically humble. The wellness retreat had collapsed amid allegations of financial mismanagement, and she was effectively broke again. David, generous as always, had offered her our guest room and a temporary position at Collins Tech. "Maybe this is what she needs," he'd said to me privately. "A chance to see how a successful business actually operates." I'd had my doubts, but I'd supported his decision. Family was important to David, and I loved him enough to welcome his sister into our home and business, despite our history. Looking back now, standing in that cemetery with Rachel's fingers still digging into my arm, I realized how naive I'd been. Rachel hadn't come home to learn or heal. She'd come home to position herself for exactly this moment. "Maya," she said now, her voice cutting through my memories, "I know this is difficult, but David was very specific about his wishes. He wanted the business to stay in Collins' family hands." I stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the calculation behind her grief-stricken facade. The pieces were falling into place. Her sudden interest in our business operations, her detailed questions about client contracts and financial procedures, her insistence on accessing David's computer to help with administrative tasks. She hadn't been helping. She'd been preparing. And now, with David barely cold in the ground, she was making her move. The drive home from the cemetery felt endless. Rachel had finally released her grip on my arm, but I could still feel the indentations her fingers had left. She rode in the passenger seat of my car, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about necessary transitions and protecting David's legacy, while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to process what was happening. 3 weeks. It had only been 3 weeks since that terrible Tuesday morning when my entire world collapsed in the span of heartbeats. I'd been upstairs getting dressed for a client presentation when I heard the crash. The sound of shattering ceramic echoed through our house, followed by a heavy thud that made my stomach drop. I'd called David's name as I rushed downstairs, expecting to find broken dishes and maybe a sheepish apology. Instead, I found my husband lying motionless on our kitchen floor, surrounded by the remnants of his favorite coffee mug, the one I'd given him for our 5th wedding anniversary with "World's Best Business Partner," printed in fading blue letters. "David!" I'd screamed, dropping to my knees beside him. His eyes were closed, his face an alarming shade of gray. I pressed my ear to his chest, listening desperately for a heartbeat while my hands shook so violently I could barely dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? My husband collapsed. I'd managed to choke out. He's not responsive. Please, you have to help him. The dispatcher's voice had been calm and professional, walking me through CPR while sirens wailed in the distance. I'd pumped David's chest and breathed into his lungs, tasting the lingering flavor of his morning coffee, willing him to come back to me with every compression. The paramedics had arrived in what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. They'd worked over David with efficient urgency, their equipment beeping and humming while I stood pressed against the kitchen wall, watching them fight for his life on our hardwood floor. "Ma'am, we need to transport him immediately," the lead paramedic had said. "You can follow us to Northwestern Memorial." Those next 6 hours in the hospital waiting room had been the longest of my life. I'd paced the sterile corridors, called our employees to cancel meetings, and stared at my phone hoping for miracle updates that never came. David's colleagues from his old tech job had shown up, along with our neighbors and a few close friends. Everyone spoke in hushed whispers, offering coffee I couldn't drink and comfort I couldn't accept. Dr. Martinez had finally emerged from the cardiac unit at 3:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock obsessively, as if keeping track of minutes could somehow change the outcome. "Mrs. Collins," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm very sorry. Your husband suffered a massive myocardial infarction. We did everything we could, but the damage was too extensive. He's gone." Gone. Such a simple word for something so devastating. The days that followed were a blur of impossible decisions and suffocating grief. I had to plan a funeral while my brain felt wrapped in cotton. Choose flowers for a man who'd always brought me wildflowers from our backyard. Write an obituary that somehow captured 45 years of life in a few paragraphs. Notify clients and employees while barely able to string coherent sentences together. Our business manager, Sarah, had been a godsend during those dark days. She'd handled the immediate client concerns while I dealt with funeral arrangements, shielding me from the worst of the business chaos. But even her competent support couldn't fill the David-shaped hole in every aspect of my existence. The most surreal part was that life kept moving forward. Clients still needed their projects completed. Bills still needed paying. The world continued spinning while mine had stopped completely. But there was something else haunting me during those grief-stricken weeks. Something that had happened 3 days before David's heart attack. A phone call that now seemed like prophecy. I'd been reviewing quarterly reports when David burst into our home office, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. He'd been carrying a stack of bank statements and printouts, his hands trembling with emotion. "Maya, we need to talk," he'd said, closing the door behind him with unusual force. "It's about Rachel." The urgency in his voice had made me set aside my work immediately. David rarely got truly angry, but when he did, it was usually about something serious. "What's wrong?" I'd asked, though part of me already suspected. "She's been stealing from us," he'd said, spreading the documents across my desk. "For months. Maybe longer. Look at these withdrawals. They're all authorized with my signature, but I never signed any of them." I'd studied the papers with growing horror. Withdrawal after withdrawal, ranging from $500 to $15,000, all supposedly signed by David during times when he was traveling for business conferences or client meetings. The forged signatures were good, almost perfect replicas of his handwriting, but there were subtle differences that became obvious once you knew what to look for. "How much?" I'd whispered. "So far. Over $800,000, David had said, sinking into his chair. "And there might be more." I only discovered this because I was trying to reconcile some discrepancies in our quarterly taxes. We'd spent that entire evening building a case, documenting every fraudulent transaction, cross-referencing them with David's travel schedule, compiling evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic embezzlement. David had been heartbroken, not just about the money but about the betrayal. "She's my sister," he'd kept saying as if repetition could make it make sense. "How could she do this to us? To family?" We'd decided to secure all the evidence before confronting Rachel directly. David had wanted to give her a chance to explain, maybe even make restitution if she was genuinely remorseful. I'd been less optimistic about her potential for remorse, but I'd supported his decision to handle things quietly. "We'll talk to her tomorrow," David had said that final night, kissing me goodnight in our home office where we'd spent so many happy hours building our dreams together. Tomorrow never came. The next morning David was gone. In the weeks following his death, I'd found myself returning to those documents obsessively. Partly it was practical. I needed to understand the full scope of Rachel's theft for legal purposes. But mostly it was emotional. Working on the case felt like continuing a conversation with David, honoring his last request to protect what we'd built together. What I discovered was worse than we'd initially realized. Rachel hadn't just been stealing cash. She'd been siphoning money through fake vendor payments, inflated expense reports and phantom consulting fees. The total damage was approaching $1.2 million, nearly 10% of our company's value. She'd gotten bolder after David's death, probably assuming I was too grief-stricken to notice financial irregularities. But grief had actually sharpened my focus in some ways. I had nothing else to think about except the mystery David had left me to solve. Meanwhile, Rachel had been playing the role of grieving sister with Oscar-worthy performance. She'd sobbed dramatically at the funeral, clutching my hand during the eulogy and whispering about how much she'd miss her baby brother. She'd brought me meals I couldn't eat and offered to handle business communications I couldn't face. But I'd started noticing things. The way she'd volunteered to help with tasks that involved accessing our financial systems. Her sudden interest in meeting with our attorney and accountant. The subtle questions about life insurance policies and business succession plans. Now, sitting in my car after that cemetery conversation, I finally understood what I'd been witnessing. Rachel's grief was genuine, but not for David. She was mourning the lost opportunity to steal even more before her brother discovered her crimes. And now she thought she could simply take everything legally, using forged documents and my grief-induced vulnerability to complete the theft she'd started months ago. He was wrong. David might be gone, but the case we'd built together was bulletproof. Rachel had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd underestimated the widow she thought she could easily manipulate. I was about to prove just how wrong she was. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the hollow feeling in my chest. I'd barely slept, my mind cycling between memories of David and the growing certainty that Rachel was orchestrating something far worse than simple theft. When I shuffled downstairs in my robe at 7 a.m., I found her already dressed for business in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. She was sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop open, a stack of manila folders arranged beside her coffee cup. The sight was jarring. This woman treating our home like her personal boardroom barely 12 hours after we'd buried David. "Good morning, Maya," she said without looking up from her screen. "I hope you got some rest. We have a lot to discuss today." I poured myself coffee with shaking hands, noticing she'd made the expensive imported blend David always said tasted like pretentious water. Another small violation that somehow felt enormous. "Rachel, I'm not sure I'm ready to." "I understand this is difficult," she interrupted, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. "But delaying won't make it easier. David's clients are already asking questions about continuity of service. We need to establish clear leadership before they start jumping ship." The casual way she said "we" made my stomach turn. As if she'd been running Collins Tech Solutions all along instead of living in our guest room and stealing our money. "Maybe we should wait until Tom Henderson gets back from his daughter's wedding," I suggested, testing whether she'd stick to her lie from yesterday. Rachel's smile didn't waver. "Actually, I spoke with Tom yesterday evening. He's cutting his trip short to handle this transition. Very professional of him, don't you think?" Another lie. I'd called Tom's office again that morning, and his secretary confirmed he wouldn't return until Thursday. But I kept my expression neutral, letting Rachel think I was buying her deception. "Now," she continued, opening the first folder with theatrical precision, "let's review the partnership restructuring that David and I discussed last month." She slid a thick document across the table. The header read Collins Tech Solutions Partnership Amendment, in official-looking typeface. My name appeared throughout the text, but always in subordinate positions: junior partner, administrative coordinator, operations assistant. "I don't understand," I said, though I understood perfectly. "David and I were equal partners. We started this company together." Rachel's expression shifted to something that might have been pity if it weren't so condescending. "Maya, I know David let you feel important, but let's be realistic about your actual contributions. You handled some clerical work, answered phones, did basic bookkeeping. David was the visionary, the technical genius. Without him, what specialized skills do you actually bring to the table? The words hit like physical blows, each one calculated to undermine my confidence. But beneath my grief, something harder was crystallizing. Rachel wasn't just stealing money, she was trying to steal my identity, rewrite the history of everything David and I had accomplished together. These signatures, I said, studying the documents more carefully. When exactly did David sign these? October 15th, Rachel replied smoothly. He was very concerned about the company's future, especially with his health concerns. October 15th. I remembered that date clearly because it was the day of our biggest client presentation of the year. David and I had spent 14 hours straight preparing financial projections and technical specifications for a potential $2 million contract. He'd been completely focused on that presentation, stressed about every detail. The idea that he'd taken time that day to restructure our partnership without mentioning it to me was absurd. But the signature looked right. Almost right. The D in David was slightly too rounded, the S in Collins a fraction too straight. Someone had practiced his handwriting extensively, but they'd missed the subtle imperfections that made his signature uniquely his. Here's what I'm prepared to offer, Rachel continued, opening another folder. A generous buyout of $500,000, plus a consulting contract if you want to stay involved in a limited capacity. You could handle basic administrative tasks, answer phones, that sort of thing. $500,000. For a company we'd built to a $12 million valuation. For 8 years of 16-hour days, for every late night we'd spent debugging code and strategizing growth, for every client relationship I'd nurtured from cold calls to million-dollar contracts. That seems... I paused, choosing my words carefully, lower than I would have expected. Rachel's laugh was sharp. Maya, you're thinking emotionally, not rationally. Yes, the company has revenue, but revenue isn't profit. And without David's technical expertise, how much is that client base really worth? Most of our contracts were based on personal relationships with David. When word gets out that he's gone, she let the implication hang in the air. It was a threat disguised as business analysis, and we both knew it. I'd need time to review this with our attorney, I said carefully. Of course, Rachel nodded. Tom's already reviewed everything actually. He agrees this is the most sensible path forward. Family businesses can be complicated when there's a death, and this way everyone's interests are protected. Another lie. Tom Henderson was meticulous about documentation, and he would never review major partnership changes without involving all parties. But Rachel was betting on my grief making me compliant, too overwhelmed to question her version of events. There's something else we need to discuss, she continued, her tone shifting to false sympathy. The house. My blood went cold. What about the house? Well, it's quite large for one person, don't you think? And expensive to maintain. David always worried about you being financially secure if something happened to him. I found some research he'd done on nice condominiums downtown, much more appropriate for a single woman your age. She produced printouts from real estate websites, all featuring sterile-looking apartments that cost a third of what our house was worth. David's supposed research was dated 3 days before his heart attack, during the same period when he'd been consumed with discovering Rachel's theft. David loved this house, I said quietly. We chose it together. Why would he want me to sell it? Maya, sweetie, Rachel's voice took on that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. David was practical. He knew you'd need liquid assets more than you'd need all this space and responsibility. And frankly, staying here might just make the grieving process harder. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what someone needs. Every word was poison wrapped in fake concern. She wasn't just planning to steal the business, she wanted the house too. Our home where David and I had shared breakfast every morning for 8 years, where we'd celebrated every business milestone, where his presence still lingered in every room. I'll need to think about all this, I said, standing up from the table. It's a lot to process. Of course it is, Rachel agreed, but I caught the flash of irritation that crossed her face. She'd expected me to sign immediately, too grief-stricken to think clearly. But Maya, we really can't delay too long. The business world moves fast and our competitors are probably already circling. David wouldn't want his life's work to suffer because of sentiment. That word again. Sentiment. As if love and loyalty were weaknesses to be overcome rather than the foundation of everything meaningful in life. I understand, I lied, gathering the documents she'd given me. Let me review everything carefully tonight. As I headed upstairs, I heard Rachel making phone calls in our kitchen, her voice crisp and businesslike. She was talking to someone about finalizing the transition and moving forward with the acquisition timeline. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed David and I had shared for 8 years and spread Rachel's fraudulent documents across the comforter. Every page was a masterpiece of deception, crafted to look legitimate while systematically stripping away everything I'd worked for. But Rachel had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated my memory for details, my understanding of our business timeline, and most importantly, my knowledge of David's habits and handwriting. Every lie she'd told had a specific date, a verifiable fact I could check. And I still had the evidence David and I had compiled together, proof of her months-long embezzlement scheme, documented with the same meticulous attention to detail we'd applied to every aspect of our business. Rachel thought she was manipulating a grieving widow who'd be too overwhelmed to fight back. She had no idea she was dealing with a woman who'd spent 8 years learning how to build bulletproof cases against fraudsters. The war was just beginning and I had weapons she didn't even know existed. 2 days later, Rachel knocked on my bedroom door at 8 in the morning, her voice artificially cheerful through the wood. Maya? I thought we could handle that paperwork today. Get it all sorted out so you can start moving forward. I'd been expecting this. After our kitchen table confrontation, I'd watched her grow increasingly impatient with my requests for time to think things over. She needed my signature on those fraudulent documents and she was done waiting. I'm not sure I'm ready, I called back, playing the role of the overwhelmed widow she expected. Sweetie, I know it's hard, but delaying won't make it easier, she replied. I've arranged for us to meet with Tom Henderson this morning. He's back from his trip early just for us. Another lie. I'd confirmed that Tom was still in Florida, probably walking his daughter down the aisle at that very moment. But I needed to see where Rachel was going with this deception. Okay, I said, opening the door. Let me get dressed. Rachel was standing in the hallway wearing designer jeans and a silk blouse, casual clothes that somehow looked more expensive than most people's formal wear. Her smile was warm and concerned, the perfect mask for whatever she had planned. Take your time, she said. I'll make us some coffee for the drive. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Rachel's BMW, watching familiar neighborhoods disappear behind us. She'd been chattering nervously about the weather, about how proud David would be that we're handling everything so maturely, about the bright future ahead once all this legal stuff was settled. But we weren't heading downtown toward the financial district where Tom Henderson's office was located. Instead, Rachel was taking rural routes through the outer suburbs, past sprawling farms and industrial complexes. Is this a shortcut? I asked, though my gut already knew the answer. Construction on the main highway, Rachel replied smoothly, not taking her eyes off the road. This way's actually faster, believe it or not. Sometimes the back roads are better than the obvious routes. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Rachel had always preferred back roads, indirect approaches, manipulation over confrontation. But something about her energy today felt different. More urgent, more desperate. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and she kept checking the rearview mirror as if she expected to be followed. We drove in silence for another 10 minutes, the landscape growing increasingly isolated. Cornfields stretched endlessly on both sides of the 2-lane road, broken only by occasional farmhouses set back behind long gravel driveways. My phone showed no signal bars. We were genuinely in the middle of nowhere. Rachel, where exactly are we going? I asked, no longer bothering to hide the concern in my voice. She glanced at me then, and for just a moment her mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes, something that made my blood freeze. Somewhere we can have a final conversation, she said, her voice dropping the fake sweetness. Without interruptions. Without you running to lawyers or friends or anyone else who might complicate things. She pulled off the main road onto a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. The car crunched to a stop and suddenly the silence was deafening. No traffic, no houses visible in any direction, just endless rows of harvested corn stubble stretching to the horizon. Rachel turned to face me fully and the transformation was complete. Gone was the grieving sister, the concerned family member, the woman who'd brought me tissues and soup during my darkest days. In her place sat a stranger with dead eyes and a predator's smile. "Here's how this is going to work, Maya," she said, her voice calm and businesslike. "You're going to sign these documents transferring the business to me. You're going to accept my generous buyout offer. And then you're going to disappear quietly from all our lives." "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew. Rachel's laugh was like breaking glass. "Look around you, sweetheart. We're 20 miles from the nearest town. Your phone has no signal. Nobody knows where you are except me." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "David's gone, Maya. You're nobody without him. Just some small-town girl who got lucky for a few years. You have no family, no real friends, no one who would miss you if you just vanished." Each word was chosen to wound, to strip away what little confidence I had left. She'd been studying me for months, learning my insecurities, mapping my vulnerabilities. This wasn't just theft, it was psychological warfare. "You're sick," I said quietly. "I'm practical," she corrected. David was weak, always letting sentiment cloud his judgment. He should have gotten rid of you years ago, but he was too soft. Too romantic. Well, romance doesn't pay the bills, does it? She reached across me to the glove compartment, pulling out a small digital recorder. "I've been documenting your increasingly erratic behavior since David's death," she said, pressing play. My own voice filled the car, but the words were wrong, taken out of context and edited to make me sound unstable, paranoid, possibly suicidal. "Amazing what you can do with technology these days," Rachel said, stopping the playback. "If you disappear, everyone will understand why. The grieving widow, overwhelmed by loss, making poor decisions." Very sad, but not entirely surprising. The full scope of her plan was becoming clear. This wasn't just about stealing the business. She was planning to erase me completely, creating a narrative that would explain my absence while positioning herself as the tragic but capable survivor picking up the pieces. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. With rage. This woman had stolen from us, betrayed David's trust, and now she was threatening to destroy me entirely. She'd planned every detail, from the isolated location to the fabricated evidence that would cover her tracks. But she'd made one crucial error. "iPhone," I said. Rachel's smile widened. "What about it?" Before I could answer, she grabbed my purse and pulled out my iPhone, tossing it out her open window. I watched it shatter against the gravel, pieces of glass and metal scattering across the road shoulder. "Oops," she said with mock concern. "Clumsy me. Guess you'll have to walk to find help." She reached across me and opened my door, the October wind rushing in to cut through my light jacket. "This is where you get off, Maya. The house and business are mine now. David's gone and you're nothing without him." I felt her hand on my shoulder, pushing me toward the open door. "You can walk to that gas station about 3 miles back. Catch a ride somewhere. Start over. But if you try to contest anything, if you cause any trouble, I'll make sure you regret it." I stumbled out of the car, my feet hitting the gravel with a crunch that seemed unnaturally loud in the empty landscape. Rachel tossed my purse after me, then leaned out the window with that cruel smile still playing on her lips. "David always said you were tougher than you looked," she said. "Let's see how tough you really are when you have nothing." The car sped away, leaving me standing alone in a cloud of dust and exhaust fumes. I watched the BMW disappear around a bend, taking with it everything I thought I knew about human decency. But as the dust settled and silence returned to the empty road, something unexpected happened. Instead of the despair Rachel had counted on, I felt something else entirely. A strange sense of liberation, even triumph. Because clutched in my purse, protected in a waterproof case, was the encrypted drive containing months of evidence that would destroy Rachel's carefully constructed plans. She thought she'd abandoned a helpless widow on a deserted road. She'd actually just made the biggest mistake of her life. I smiled, shouldered my purse and started walking. The first mile was the hardest. My dress shoes weren't made for gravel roads, and the October wind cut through my jacket like razor blades. But with each step my resolve grew stronger. Rachel had counted on breaking me with that roadside abandonment, leaving me stranded and helpless. Instead, she'd freed me from any remaining loyalty or family obligation. The second mile brought clarity. As I walked past empty cornfields, I mentally catalogued every piece of evidence David and I had compiled, every forged signature Rachel had created, every lie she told. She thought she was so clever, but she'd left a digital trail that would destroy her. By the third mile, I had a complete battle plan. Miller's gas station appeared like a mirage on the horizon. A weathered building with faded signs advertising lottery tickets and cold beer. The elderly man behind the counter looked up from his crossword puzzle as I pushed through the door, his face immediately creasing with concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, taking in my disheveled appearance and probably recognizing the look of someone who'd been through something traumatic. "You look like you've been walking a while." "My car broke down," I said, which was technically true. "Could I possibly use your phone? It's an emergency." "Of course, honey." He gestured toward an old landline behind the counter. "Take your time. You want some coffee? You look half frozen." His kindness nearly broke me. After Rachel's cruelty, this stranger's simple human decency felt like a lifeline. I accepted the coffee gratefully and dialed Tom Henderson's personal cell phone number. "Maya." Tom's voice was surprised and concerned. "I just got your message. I'm still in Florida, but I can catch the first flight back if this is urgent." "What's this about Rachel presenting documents I supposedly approved?" "Tom, Rachel has been lying about everything," I said, my voice steady despite everything I'd been through. "She's forged David's signature on partnership transfer documents, and she's been embezzling from the company for months. I have proof." There was a long pause. "Maya, those are serious accusations. Are you absolutely certain?" "David discovered the theft 3 days before he died," I said. "We documented everything together. I have encrypted files with bank records, forged signatures, fake invoices, everything needed to prove she's been stealing from us systematically." "My God," Tom breathed. "Where are you now? Are you safe?" I told him about the roadside abandonment, about Rachel's threats, about her plan to erase me entirely from the business David and I had built together. Tom's language became increasingly colorful as I described what had happened. "I'm booking the next flight to Chicago," he said. "Don't talk to Rachel, don't sign anything, and don't go home alone. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and bring everything you have." After hanging up, I called Sarah, our business manager, who immediately offered to pick me up. When she arrived 20 minutes later, her face was white with shock. "Maya, my God, what happened to you?" she asked, helping me into her car. "Rachel showed her true colors," I said simply. "Sarah, I need you to secure all of our financial systems immediately. Change every password, freeze any accounts Rachel has access to, and back up everything to our secure server." Sarah nodded grimly. "I've been wondering about some irregular transactions lately. Small things that didn't quite add up. Should I document everything?" "But don't confront her directly," I interrupted. "We're going to handle this legally, and we need to make sure she can't destroy evidence or steal anything else." The next morning, I sat in Tom Henderson's office with my laptop open, showing him file after file of incriminating evidence. His expression grew darker with each document I displayed. "This is extraordinary," he said, studying a spreadsheet that cross-referenced Rachel's forged withdrawals with David's travel schedule. "The level of documentation here is prosecutorial quality. How did you compile all this without her knowing?" "David was methodical about everything," I replied. "When he discovered the first discrepancies, we treated it like any other business problem. Gather data, analyze patterns, build a case. We just never got the chance to confront her before he died." Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from lawyer to strategist. "Maya, this goes far beyond civil fraud. We're talking federal crimes here. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. This needs to go to the FBI immediately." "Will they take it seriously?" I asked. "With documentation like this? They'll take it very seriously indeed." 2 hours later, I was sitting across from FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez at the federal building downtown. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened intently as I walked through months of evidence. "Mrs. Collins," she said after reviewing the encrypted drive, "this is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen in years. Your late husband was quite thorough." "We both were," I corrected gently. This was our life's work she was stealing. Agent Martinez nodded. "We'll need to move quickly. Financial crimes like this often involve flight risks, especially when the perpetrator realizes they've been caught. Do you have any reason to believe Ms. Collins might try to leave the country?" "Actually, yes," I said, remembering Rachel's nervous energy during our car ride. She's been acting increasingly desperate lately, and she has connections in Los Angeles. She might have an exit strategy planned. We'll put a flag on her passport immediately, Agent Martinez said. In the meantime, I need you to act normally. If she contacts you, don't let on that you've spoken with us. Can you do that? I nodded, though the idea of pretending normalcy with the woman who'd abandoned me on a roadside felt surreal. Rachel's first call came that afternoon while I was at the office, working with Sarah to assess the full scope of the financial damage. Her voice was artificially sweet when I answered. Maya, sweetheart, I've been so worried about you, she said. When you didn't come home last night, I thought something terrible might have happened. Where have you been? I stayed with a friend, I lied smoothly. I needed some space to think about everything. Of course you did. Listen, I've been thinking too, and maybe I was a bit hasty with the timeline yesterday. If you need more time to process the partnership changes, I understand. Family is more important than business after all. The complete reversal in her tone told me everything I needed to know. Something had spooked her. Maybe she tried to access accounts that Sarah had already locked down, or perhaps she'd realized her fake lawyer consultations could be easily verified. That's very understanding of you, Rachel, I said, playing along. Maybe we could meet tomorrow to discuss everything more calmly. Absolutely, she agreed, relief evident in her voice. Why don't you come by the house around noon? We can have lunch and work everything out like family should. After hanging up, I immediately called Agent Martinez. She wants to meet tomorrow. She knows something's wrong. Perfect, the agent replied. That gives us tonight to execute search warrants. By the time you meet with her, we'll have everything we need. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Rachel's voice was panicked, all pretense of sweetness gone. Maya, we need to talk right now, she said, her words tumbling over each other. There's been a misunderstanding. People are asking questions about financial irregularities, but I can explain everything. We can work this out. Through my bedroom window, I could see FBI vehicles surrounding our house. Agent Martinez had warned me this would happen. I'm sorry, Rachel, I said quietly, but I think it's too late for explanations. The line went dead. 3 hours later, Agent Martinez called to inform me that Rachel had been arrested at O'Hare Airport, attempting to board a one-way flight to Costa Rica with $300,000 in cash and fake identification documents. Justice, it seemed, moved swiftly when you had 18 months of evidence gift-wrapped for federal investigators. The recovery of our stolen assets took longer, but it was thorough. Rachel had hidden money in offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and safe deposit boxes across 3 states. All of it was traced, frozen, and eventually returned to Collins Tech Solutions. Standing in Tom Henderson's office 6 weeks later, signing the final papers that restored complete control of our company to me, I felt David's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. We'd built something worth fighting for, and that fight had been won with the evidence he'd helped me gather in our final days together. Rachel had tried to steal our legacy. Instead, she'd given me the strength to protect it. The morning after signing those final papers, I walked into the Collins Tech Solutions office as its sole owner for the first time. The familiar hum of servers and the soft clicking of keyboards greeted me, but everything felt different now. This wasn't just the company David and I had built together anymore. It was my responsibility, my future, my chance to prove that Rachel's cruel assessment of my worth had been spectacularly wrong. Sarah was waiting in my office with coffee and a stack of client files, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. So, boss, she said with a slight smile, where do we start? The transition wasn't seamless. Losing David had created gaps in our technical capabilities that I needed to address immediately. Our clients had been patient during the crisis, but patience has limits in the business world. I needed someone who could fill David's shoes, not completely because no one could do that, but someone who understood both the technical demands and the company culture we'd built. The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus Rodriguez had been David's closest friend in graduate school and his partner in their first startup attempt 15 years ago. When their initial venture failed, Marcus had gone to work for a major consulting firm while David and I struck out on our own. He'd followed our success from a distance, and when I called him 3 months after Rachel's arrest, he was ready for a change. Maya, I'm so sorry about David, Marcus said during our first meeting. He was always so proud of what you two built together. He used to say you were the secret weapon that made everything work. Hiring Marcus as our new CTO felt like David giving his blessing from beyond. Marcus understood the technical side, but he also respected the business philosophy David and I had developed. More importantly, he brought fresh perspectives on cybersecurity that would prove prophetic. You know, Marcus said during his second week, what happened with Rachel isn't unique. Internal fraud is epidemic in small to medium-sized businesses. Most owners have no idea how vulnerable they are until it's too late. That conversation planted the seed for what would become our most significant expansion. I'd lived through the nightmare of discovering that someone I trusted had been systematically stealing from us. I'd experienced the fear, the betrayal, the near destruction of everything David and I had worked for. But I'd also learned how to fight back, how to document evidence, how to work with federal investigators to recover stolen assets. Other business owners needed those skills. Within 6 months, we'd launched Collins Cybersecurity Consulting, a specialized division focused on helping companies protect themselves from internal threats. Our first client was a family-owned manufacturing business whose bookkeeper had embezzled $200,000 over 3 years. The owner, Janet Morrison, was a woman in her 60s who'd built the company with her late husband, and watching her relief as we helped recover her stolen money felt like healing a piece of my own trauma. How did you know? Janet asked after we'd identified the fraudulent transactions. How did you spot the patterns my own accountant missed? Because I lived it, I told her simply. I know what betrayal looks like when it's wrapped in fake sympathy and family loyalty. Word spread quickly in Chicago's business community. Companies began reaching out proactively, wanting security audits before they became victims. We developed software tools that could flag suspicious transactions, training programs that helped owners recognize warning signs, and rapid response protocols for businesses that discovered they'd been compromised. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply fulfilling. Every company we protected, every theft we prevented, felt like a victory over the mindset that had nearly destroyed me. Rachel had seen me as weak, expendable, someone whose contributions could be dismissed and erased. Instead, I was using the pain she'd caused to build something stronger and more meaningful than before. The growth was remarkable. Within 2 years, we'd expanded from a $12 million company to $20 million, with offices in 3 states and a waiting list of clients seeking our cybersecurity services. But the numbers were less important than the relationships we were building. I found myself connecting with other widowed entrepreneurs, women who'd lost their partners but refused to let grief define their limits. We formed an informal support network, sharing strategies for managing businesses alone while honoring the memories of the people we'd built them with. Some evenings, we'd meet for dinner and talk about the unique challenges of stepping into leadership roles we'd never expected to fill. One of these women, Dr. Lisa Chin, had lost her husband to cancer 2 years before David died. She'd taken over their medical research company and was struggling with investor relations, an area where David and I had developed significant expertise. I know the science better than anyone, Lisa said during one of our dinners, but when I walk into those boardrooms, I can see them thinking I'm just the widow trying to keep her husband's company alive. So prove them wrong, I said. Not with words, with results. Let your success be your argument. Lisa took that advice and tripled her company's value within 18 months. When she called to thank me, she said something that stayed with me. You taught me that being underestimated can be a competitive advantage. People reveal their true strategies when they think you're not a threat. That conversation inspired me to create the David Collins Memorial Scholarship, focused on supporting underprivileged students in technology fields. David had always believed that talent was equally distributed but opportunity wasn't. The scholarship program became a way to extend that philosophy beyond his lifetime. The first recipient was Maria Santos, a 17-year-old from the South Side whose computer programming skills were extraordinary but whose family couldn't afford college tuition. Watching her graduate 4 years later and start her own software company felt like David's dreams taking flight in ways we'd never imagined. Meanwhile, Rachel's story was unfolding very differently. Agent Martinez kept me informed of the legal proceedings, though I'd requested minimal involvement. Rachel had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Her lawyers had tried to negotiate a plea deal, claiming she'd been overwhelmed by grief and made poor decisions, but the extensive premeditation we documented made that argument impossible. Her attempts to contact me from prison started 8 months into her sentence. Letters filled with apologies and explanations, phone calls I refused to accept, even messages passed through mutual acquaintances. Rachel wanted forgiveness, or perhaps she wanted to plant doubt about her guilt. I wanted neither her apologies nor her justifications. Tom Henderson had advised me that any contact could potentially complicate future legal proceedings if she appealed her conviction. But honestly, my reasons were simpler than legal strategy. Rachel had tried to erase me from my own life, and I'd moved beyond caring about her regret or her fate. The real revelation came 2 years after her sentencing, when I was driving past the spot where she'd abandoned me. I'd been visiting a potential client in the suburbs, and my GPS had routed me down the same rural road where I'd stood in my funeral dress, clutching my purse and watching her drive away. I pulled over at the exact location, gravel crunching under my tires just as it had that terrible day. But standing there in the afternoon sunlight, successful and confident and surrounded by people who respected my abilities, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Rachel's cruelty had been intended to break me, to reduce me to nothing so she could steal everything David and I had built. Instead, it had freed me from the last vestiges of self-doubt I'd carried about my own capabilities. She'd forced me to stand completely on my own, and I'd discovered that I was stronger than either of us had realized. David would have been proud of what Collins Tech Solutions had become, not just financially but philosophically. We were protecting other families from the betrayal we'd experienced, creating opportunities for young people who reminded me of ourselves when we started, building something that would outlast both of us. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Rachel had tried to tear down what David and I built together. Instead, I'd used her betrayal as foundation stones for something even better. Standing on that gravel road where she'd left me for dead, I smiled and drove home to the life I'd built from the ashes of her cruelty. If this story of quiet justice had you rooting for Maya, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Maya smiled on that gravel road, clutching the evidence that would destroy Rachel's schemes. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought you were weak? Share your story, I read every comment. Don't miss more incredible revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 28, celebrating our 1-year anniversary at Azul, the restaurant where Ethan first told me he loved me. For 6 months, I'd secretly studied Spanish to surprise my half-Colombian boyfriend tonight. As we clinked glasses, Ethan turned to his friend Marco and switched to Spanish, assuming I wouldn't understand. "She looks good tonight, but this dress is too tight for her body type," he smirked in perfect Spanish. I maintained my smile while my stomach dropped. Should I reveal I understood every cruel word or wait? The betrayal cut deeper with each syllable. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever caught someone talking behind your back. Ethan and I met 14 months ago during one of Seattle's infamous downpours. I ducked into a coffee shop, drenched and irritated, when a deep voice asked if I wanted to borrow a towel. Looking up, I saw Ethan Williams standing there, handsome with his dark curly hair and amber eyes, holding out a small gym towel from his bag. It was such a simple gesture, but the thoughtfulness caught me off guard. "I always carry one for emergencies," he explained with a charming smile. "Seattle weather demands preparation." That smile was disarming. We ended up sharing a table as the cafe filled with other rain refugees. 3 hours of conversation felt like minutes. Ethan was confident, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. As a marketing specialist at a mid-sized tech company, I wasn't used to men asking thoughtful questions about my career ambitions. Ethan had moved to Seattle 5 years earlier and established himself as a successful real estate agent. He specialized in luxury properties and exuded the polished confidence of someone accustomed to closing big deals. His Colombian mother and American father had raised him in Florida before he ventured west for college and stayed. "My mother made sure I grew up bilingual," he'd told me on our 3rd date. "Speaking Spanish connects me to half my identity." I remembered how his eyes lit up when discussing his heritage, switching effortlessly between English and beautiful, rolling Spanish when describing his grandmother's cooking. I'd smiled and nodded, understanding nothing but enchanted by the musical quality of his words. From the beginning, our relationship had a particular dynamic. Ethan was used to taking charge, making decisions, and offering guidance. I found myself naturally accommodating, grateful for his worldliness. He chose the restaurants, suggested weekend activities, and gently corrected my wine selections. I didn't mind. After a string of relationships with directionless men, Ethan's confidence was refreshing. But underneath my accommodation lurked insecurity. Ethan's world was filled with successful professionals, gallery openings, and charity galas. My college education from a state school sometimes felt inadequate among his friends with prestigious degrees. I constantly worried about saying the wrong thing, wearing the inappropriate outfit, or somehow revealing I didn't belong in his sophisticated circle. "You're doing fine," he'd reassure me after social gatherings, in a tone that suggested I'd passed a test rather than enjoyed myself. 3 months into dating Ethan, I met his mother during her visit to Seattle. Sophia Williams was elegant, intelligent, and intimidating. She spoke primarily Spanish to Ethan during dinner, occasionally translating for me with a tight smile. I felt like an outsider watching their animated conversation, catching Ethan's apologetic glances between responses. That night, I made a decision. If Spanish was important to Ethan, I would learn. Not just tourist phrases, but real conversational ability. I found Alicia, a Spanish tutor, through a colleague and arranged private lessons 3 times weekly. I practiced during lunch breaks, listened to Spanish podcasts while commuting, and watched Spanish television with subtitles at night when Ethan wasn't staying over. Late meetings, I'd explain when canceling our weeknight plans. Big project deadline, I'd text when declining weekend brunches. The secrecy was exhausting but necessary for my surprise. Alicia proved an encouraging teacher, praising my dedication despite my struggles with pronunciation and subjunctive tenses. "Your boyfriend will be so impressed," she assured me during particularly frustrating sessions. "This is a beautiful gift you're giving him." Throughout our relationship, Ethan often spoke Spanish with his family during calls, but never suggested teaching me. When I once expressed interest in learning basic phrases, he'd patted my hand and said, "It's a challenging language, babe. Maybe start with Duolingo for fun." His dismissive tone stung, fueling my determination to master Spanish in secret. As our 1-year anniversary approached, Ethan suggested celebrating at Azul, the upscale restaurant where he'd first said "I love you" 6 months into our relationship. The reservation excited me not just for the romantic significance, but as the perfect setting to reveal my Spanish proficiency. I imagined his delighted surprise, perhaps tears of appreciation and deepened connection as I unlocked this part of his world. The night before our anniversary, I rehearsed my prepared speech with Alicia over video call. "Tu idioma es hermoso como tú. He estado aprendiendo para compartir esta parte de ti. Your language is beautiful like you." I've been learning to share this part of you. Perfect, Cassie, Alicia beamed. Your accent is natural and the sentiment is lovely. He'll be so touched. I fell asleep imagining Ethan's face lighting up with pride and affection, never suspecting how differently our anniversary night would unfold. I spent 3 hours preparing for our anniversary dinner. My navy blue dress, purchased specifically for the occasion, hugged my curves before flowing elegantly to my knees. I styled my auburn hair in loose waves, applied makeup that enhanced without overwhelming, and selected delicate silver jewelry that caught the light with each movement. The reflection staring back from my full-length mirror looked polished, sophisticated, worthy of standing beside Ethan. Perfect, I whispered, rehearsing my Spanish reveal one final time before slipping on heels and grabbing my clutch. Ethan texted that he'd meet me at the restaurant. Another late showing for a potential client, he explained. I tamped down disappointment that we wouldn't arrive together and hailed a rideshare to Azul. The restaurant occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise, offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured the sunset's pink-orange glow, while modern chandeliers cast intimate lighting over white-clothed tables. A hostess in a sleek black dress checked my reservation. Right this way, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Williams is already seated. My heart fluttered with anticipation as I followed her through the dining room, mentally practicing my Spanish opener. But as we approached the table, confusion replaced excitement. Ethan wasn't alone. 4 additional people surrounded him, champagne glasses already raised in a toast. I recognized Marco Rodriguez, Ethan's college friend and business associate, sitting beside his girlfriend Tara. Across from them sat Jason Chan and his new girlfriend Kelsey, whom I'd met only once at a holiday party. There she is. Ethan stood, looking handsome in his tailored gray suit. He kissed my cheek and pulled out my chair. Hope you don't mind the company. Marco called about celebrating their new condo purchase, and it seemed perfect to combine celebrations. I forced a smile while disappointment crashed through me. Our intimate anniversary dinner had transformed into a group social event without consultation. The Spanish reveal I'd planned now seemed impossible in this setting. Of course not, I lied smoothly. Congratulations on the condo, Marco and Tara. Thanks, Cassie, Marco replied with genuine warmth. Unlike some of Ethan's friends, Marco always made effort to include me in conversations. Sorry to crash your anniversary. Ethan assured us you wouldn't mind. It's wonderful to share celebrations, I said, settling into my seat while calculating how to salvage the evening. A server appeared immediately, filling my champagne glass with Dom Perignon. Compliments of Mr. Williams, who arranged this special reserve for the table. Ethan beamed, clearly pleased with himself. Only the best tonight. The champagne's crisp bubbles didn't quite wash away my disappointment, but I appreciated the gesture. Perhaps we could still have our moment later in the evening. Ethan appeared attentive during the appetizer course, asking about my day and keeping his hand on my knee beneath the table. He'd ordered the seafood tower before my arrival, another decision made without me, but selected my favorite oysters among the assortment. Happy anniversary, babe, he murmured, clinking his glass against mine while the others chatted about real estate trends. His amber eyes held genuine affection, temporarily dissolving my frustration. As our entrees arrived, perfectly seared scallops for me, Wagyu steak for Ethan, the dynamics shifted. Ethan drank more rapidly, ordering an expensive Cabernet after finishing his champagne. His attention drifted increasingly toward Marco and Jason's conversation about a potential development property. His hand disappeared from my knee as he gesticulated about market valuations and investment potential. I turned to Tara, attempting friendly conversation about her interior design business, but noticed her frequent glances toward her phone. Kelsey contributed occasional comments about her work in pharmaceutical sales, but seemed equally peripheral to the men's increasingly animated discussion. This always happens, Tara whispered with a knowing smile. The boys get talking business and forget we exist. I nodded, uncomfortable with both her observation and my acceptance of it. Was this pattern so established that Ethan's friends' girlfriends expected marginalization? More troubling was my own resignation. When had I become someone who smiled politely while being sidelined? 40 minutes into dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and stood abruptly. Need to take this. Potential client with a waterfront listing. He strode toward the restaurant entrance, leaving me mid-sentence about a work project I'd been describing. I watched him go, noticing how he paused to charm the hostess before disappearing into the hallway. Another drink while we wait? Jason offered, signaling the server. I declined politely, sipping water instead. The conversation fractured into smaller exchanges as we awaited Ethan's return. Marco discussed vacation plans with Tara while Jason and Kelsey debated the merits of different Seattle neighborhoods. I contributed occasionally, but felt increasingly like an ornament rather than a participant. 15 minutes stretched to 25 before Ethan reappeared, sliding into his seat without apology for his extended absence. His cheeks looked flushed, whether from alcohol or excitement unclear. Sorry about that, he said to the table generally, not specifically to me. Potential oceanfront property. Could be my biggest commission this year. Congratulations, I offered, trying to recapture our anniversary spirit. That's exciting. Ethan nodded distractedly, turning immediately to Marco. They exchanged significant glances before leaning closer together. I noticed Marco's eyes flick toward me briefly before he whispered something to Ethan. Both men glanced my way, then quickly looked elsewhere when they caught my gaze. Something cold settled in my stomach, a premonition that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. I straightened my posture and sipped my water, mentally reviewing my Spanish vocabulary. Whatever happened next, I was more prepared than anyone at the table realized. As dessert menus arrived, Ethan's posture changed. He leaned toward Marco, lowering his voice. Then came the switch, the subtle shift in his throat and tongue as English gave way to Spanish. After months of intensive study, the transition was unmistakable to my ears. Esta noche es interminable, Ethan said, rolling his eyes slightly. Casi está siendo tan necesitada. Siempre tengo que prestar atención. Tonight is endless. Cassie is being so needy. I always have to pay attention to her. My fingers froze around my water glass, heart suddenly pounding. I maintained my pleasant expression with effort, pretending to study the dessert options while my boyfriend continued in what he believed was a private code. Marco glanced uncomfortably in my direction before responding quietly, "No sees duro con ella. Es tu aniversario. Don't be harsh with her. It's your anniversary." Ethan snorted softly. "Un ano es sufficient. Ese vestido es demasiado ajustado para su tipo de cuerpo, no crees? Está tratando demasiado. 1 year is enough. That dress is too tight for her body type, don't you think? She's trying too hard." The words sliced through me like physical wounds. I felt blood rushing to my face but forced myself to appear calm, taking a deliberate sip of water while screaming internally. 6 months of dedicated Spanish study had prepared me for a romantic surprise, not this gut-wrenching betrayal. "No diría eso," Marco muttered, clearly uncomfortable. "Se ve bien." I wouldn't say that. She looks good. "Deberías ver a la chica que me mostró una casa la semana pasada," Ethan continued, ignoring Marco's reluctance. "Una verdadera belleza colombiana. Pelo largo y negro, curvas perfectas. No como las chicas americanas que solo comen ensaladas y siguen pareciendo gordas. You should see the girl who showed me a house last week. A true Colombian beauty. Long black hair, perfect curves. Not like American girls who just eat salads and still look fat." My hand trembled slightly, but I steadied it by placing my palm flat against the table. The Spanish phrases I'd so carefully practiced now served a different purpose, allowing me to understand each cutting insult. My anniversary gift had become a window into Ethan's true character. "Habla español también. No tendría que explicar mi cultura como lo hago con Cassie. Tan básica, con su trabajo de marketing aburrido." She speaks Spanish too. I wouldn't have to explain my culture like I do with Cassie. So basic, with her boring marketing job. Marco shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Ethan and me. Creo que deberías parar, amigo. Estás siendo injusto. I think you should stop, friend. You're being unfair. Sabes que? Ethan leaned closer to Marco, voice slightly slurred from the multiple drinks. Estoy planeando terminar con ella después de nuestras vacaciones el próximo mes. Ya reserve una habitación separada en el hotel. Un último fin de semana antes de acabar con esto. You know what? I'm planning to break up with her after our vacation next month. I already booked a separate room at the hotel. One last weekend before ending this. Heat flooded my body, followed by a wave of cold numbness. The restaurant sounds receded as I processed what I'd heard. Ethan wasn't just mocking my appearance or belittling my career. He was planning our breakup while simultaneously planning a vacation under false pretenses. I flashed back to earlier that week when I'd taken a half-day off work to find the perfect anniversary gift for Ethan. I'd selected a vintage watch I couldn't really afford, justified by my belief in our future together. The wrapped package sat in my purse now, suddenly absurd. While maintaining my neutral expression, memories cascaded through my mind, canceling plans with friends to accommodate Ethan's schedule, spending hours preparing meals he often criticized as too bland, listening attentively to his work stories while he frequently interrupted mine. I'd interpreted these as minor relationship compromises, not warning signs of fundamental disrespect. ¿Why sabes que más? Ethan continued, apparently enjoying his secret conversation. Su familia es tan aburrida. Su padre es mecánico y su madre es maestra de escuela. Tan común. Mi madre tenía razón sobre ella. And you know what else? Her family is so boring. Her father is a mechanic and her mother is a schoolteacher. So common. My mother was right about her. The insult to my family, my kind, hard-working parents who had welcomed Ethan warmly into their modest home, ignited something beyond hurt. Anger began replacing shock, strengthening rather than weakening me. Every Spanish syllable now revealed the true Ethan, dissolving the idealized version I'd constructed. ¿Que hay de la rubia en la mesa junto a la ventana? Ethan nodded subtly toward a woman dining nearby. Eso es más mi tipo. Apuesto a que ella no habla de estrategias de marketing durante la cena. What about the blonde at the table by the window? That's more my type. I bet she doesn't talk about marketing strategies during dinner. Marco frowned, no longer making eye contact with Ethan. Estás borracho, hombre. Deberías parar. You're drunk, man. You should stop. Physical sensations intensified as my shock evolved into clarity. My heart raced uncomfortably, hands trembled beneath the table, and my face felt flushed despite my efforts to appear normal. Jason and Kelsey continued their separate conversation, oblivious to the Spanish character assassination occurring beside them. Tara scrolled through her phone, perhaps accustomed to being excluded from Marco and Ethan's Spanish exchanges. I thought about the vacation Ethan had proposed last week, a long weekend at a beachfront resort in San Diego. I'd arranged time off work, bought a new swimsuit, and researched local attractions. Now I understood it was planned as our final trip, with Ethan securing separate accommodations for what would become our separation. Ella and I siquiera sospecha. Ethan chuckled softly. Tan confiada. Tan fácil de engañar. She doesn't even suspect. So trusting. So easy to fool. Something shifted inside me at those words. The hurt transformed into cold, clear purpose. As Ethan continued his Spanish diatribe, unaware that every word revealed his true character, I made my decision. This anniversary would indeed mark a significant milestone in our relationship, just not the one either of us had anticipated. While Ethan continued his Spanish commentary, oblivious to my comprehension, my mind raced through a battlefield of emotions. The elegant restaurant suddenly felt suffocating, crystal glasses and silver flatware blurring as I processed what was happening. I maintained my pleasant expression through sheer force of will, even managing an occasional nod toward Kelsey's story about a difficult client. Behind my composed facade, memories surfaced with new clarity, warning signs I'd rationalized away throughout our relationship. The time Ethan corrected my table manners at dinner with his colleagues, tapping my elbow to lower it from the table while giving me a look of gentle admonishment. How he frequently reworked my outfit choices before social events, suggesting alternatives that were more appropriate for the occasion. Es como tener que entrenar a un cachorro, Ethan was saying to Marco. It's like having to train a puppy. I recalled the night I'd proudly shared news about my promotion at work. Ethan had smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "That's great, babe. Small steps." At the time, I'd accepted his diminishment of my achievement, even feeling grateful for his grounding perspective. Now, the memory burned with humiliation. Physical discomfort intensified as I sat through this Spanish dissection of my inadequacies. My chest felt tight, breathing shallow. The beautiful anniversary dress I'd carefully selected now felt like a costume, one Ethan had just mockingly critiqued. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, forcing myself to take small sips rather than the gulping my dry throat craved. Should I confront him immediately? Create a scene in this upscale restaurant? The vindictive part of me wanted to stand up, throw my napkin down, and expose him publicly. I imagined the satisfaction of watching shock replace his smug expression as I responded to his insults in perfect Spanish. But something deeper held me back. The strategic part of my brain, the part that had methodically learned Spanish over 6 months, counseled patience. A public confrontation might be temporarily satisfying, but ultimately shallow. Ethan would likely twist the narrative, painting me as overreacting or misunderstanding his jokes. "Mira como sonríe, sin entender nada," Ethan said to Marco. "Look how she smiles, understanding nothing." If only he knew. Each Spanish syllable now revealed more about Ethan than he realized, exposing layers of disrespect beyond the immediate insults. This wasn't just about tonight's mockery. It was about a fundamental pattern of belittlement I'd been too enamored to recognize. I remembered our third date, when Ethan had taken my phone to fix my settings without asking permission. At the time, I'd found it helpful rather than intrusive. Then there was his habit of ordering my meals without consultation, always with a charming, "Trust me, you'll love this." His constant texts checking my whereabouts when we weren't together. The subtle ways he'd isolated me from friends whose influence he deemed negative. What I'd interpreted as protective behavior now revealed itself as controlling. What I'd accepted as sophistication now appeared as elitism. The charming confidence that had attracted me masked a profound insecurity that required constant validation through dominance. As my anger crystallized into clarity, I noticed other dynamics around the table. Marco's growing discomfort with Ethan's comments. Tara's detached resignation. The practiced way Jason and Kelsey maintained separate conversation, suggesting this pattern of exclusion was familiar. Después de un año, el sexo así vuelve aburrido de todos modos, Ethan said with a dismissive hand gesture. After a year, the sex becomes boring anyway. Heat flooded my face at this intimate betrayal. Marco finally looked genuinely uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with both Ethan and me. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm replacing my initial shock. The decision forming in my mind wasn't just about tonight's humiliation, but about reclaiming my dignity from a relationship built on unequal footing. The server approached, asking about dessert orders. I smiled politely, requesting a few minutes more to decide. The brief interruption gave me space to finalize my strategy. I wouldn't create a scene that Ethan could later reframe as emotional instability. Instead, I would respond with the same calculated precision I'd applied to learning Spanish. "Creo que esta molesta porque he estado en mi teléfono," Ethan said with a chuckle. "I think she's upset because I've been on my phone." "No es muy brillante," he added unnecessarily. "Bonita, pero no brillante." Not very bright. Pretty, but not bright. That final insult solidified my resolve. For a year, I'd accommodated Ethan's preferences, adjusted my behavior to meet his expectations, and worked to fit into his world. I'd even learned Spanish to connect with his heritage. Meanwhile, he'd been calculating my expiration date, planning our separation while exploiting my trust. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to prepare for what would come next. As I walked away, I heard Ethan switch to English, likely making some excuse for my departure. The knowledge that I understood everything, that his private commentary was completely transparent to me, provided the first genuine satisfaction of the evening. In the elegant bathroom, I stared at my reflection under flattering lighting designed to make restaurant patrons feel beautiful. My makeup remained perfect, hair still elegantly styled. Externally, I looked like the sophisticated girlfriend Ethan had molded me to be. Internally, I was transforming into someone stronger, someone unwilling to accept disrespect disguised as guidance. "You've got this, Cassie," I whispered to my reflection. 6 months of Spanish lessons are about to pay off in a way neither of you expected. I reapplied my lipstick, straightened my shoulders, and practiced the calm, slightly amused expression I would maintain throughout what came next. This anniversary would indeed mark a significant milestone, just not the one I'd planned. As I walked back toward the table, I felt lighter with each step. By the time I reached my chair, I had transformed from victim to strategist, ready to reclaim the narrative Ethan thought he controlled. I returned to the table with renewed purpose, sliding gracefully into my seat. Ethan barely acknowledged my return, deep in Spanish conversation with Marco about a potential real estate development. I noticed Marco's obvious discomfort, his eyes darting toward me apologetically. "Would anyone like to share a dessert?" I asked the table in English, my voice steady and pleasant. "The chocolate soufflé here is spectacular." "Sure, we can share one," Ethan replied dismissively before turning back to Marco. "Como estaba diciendo sobre esa propiedad?" As I was saying about that property. I waited for a natural pause in conversation, then casually addressed our server who had approached for dessert orders. "Me gustaría el soufflé de chocolate, por favor. Y tal vez un café con leche para acompañarlo." "I'd like the chocolate soufflé, please. And perhaps a latte to accompany it." My Spanish pronunciation was flawless, my tone casual as though speaking Spanish was the most natural thing in the world. The table fell silent. From my peripheral vision, I saw Ethan freeze mid-gesture, his glass of bourbon suspended halfway to his lips. "Claro, señorita." "Excellent election," the server responded with a smile. "Of course, miss." "Excellent choice." I turned to Tara, maintaining my composure. "¿Te gustaría compartir el postre conmigo? Es bastante grande." "Would you like to share the dessert with me? It's quite large." Tara's eyes widened in surprise. I don't speak Spanish," she stammered, looking between me and Marco in confusion. "Oh, I'm sorry," I replied with a gentle smile. I just assumed since Spanish is spoken so freely at this table, everyone must understand it. The implication hung in the air. Ethan's face drained of color as understanding dawned. He placed his bourbon on the table with a heavy thud, some of the amber liquid sloshing over the rim. "Cassie," he began, voice strained. "I didn't realize you hablas español?" I interrupted, tilting my head innocently. "Qué sorpresa. Yo también." "You speak Spanish?" What a surprise. "Me too." Marco suddenly became intensely interested in his napkin, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Jason and Kelsey exchanged confused glances, sensing the sudden tension without understanding its source. "Since when do you speak Spanish?" Ethan asked, attempting to sound casual while his eyes betrayed panic. "Oh, for about 6 months now," I replied lightly. "I've been taking intensive lessons. I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary. And I certainly got a surprise in return." I turned to Marco, switching to Spanish. "Marco, te gustó la part donde Ethan dijo que mi vestido es demasiado ajustado para mi tipo de cuerpo? O prefieres cuando menciono que está planeando terminar conmigo después de nuestras vacaciones?" "Marco, did you enjoy the part where Ethan said my dress is too tight for my body type? Or did you prefer when he mentioned he's planning to break up with me after our vacation?" Marco's face flushed dark red. "Cassie, lo siento. No estaba de acuerdo con lo que dijo." "Cassie, I'm sorry. I didn't agree with what he said." "What's happening?" Kelsey asked, looking between us. "What are you guys talking about?" Oh, just reviewing some of the charming commentary Ethan has been sharing in Spanish, I explained calmly. He's been quite descriptive about my physical shortcomings, my boring career, and my common family background. Apparently, I'm pretty but not bright. And he's already booked separate rooms for our upcoming vacation, which was planned as our final trip before breaking up. Tara gasped softly. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The server, sensing the tension, quietly placed my latte on the table and retreated. Cassie, you're overreacting, Ethan attempted, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I now recognized as his default when challenged. It was just guy talk. Marco and I were joking around. Amigo, no me metas en esto, Marco muttered. Buddy, don't drag me into this. I took a deliberate sip of my latte, maintaining eye contact with Ethan over the rim of the cup. Which part was the joke? Comparing me unfavorably to other women? Mocking my family? Or planning our breakup while sitting across from me at our anniversary dinner? You're taking everything out of context, Ethan insisted, looking around the table for support and finding none. I've had a few drinks. I didn't mean any of it. Actually, alcohol doesn't create thoughts. It just removes the filter that prevents you from expressing them, I replied. Everything you said in Spanish revealed your genuine feelings. You just never expected me to understand them. I turned to address everyone at the table. I apologize for the awkward situation. This certainly isn't how I planned to spend our anniversary. Neither did I, Ethan muttered, attempting to regain control of the narrative. I wanted a nice dinner, not a dramatic scene. No hay drama aquí, I responded coolly. Solo claridad. No drama here. Just clarity. The dessert arrived, a beautiful chocolate souffle with 2 spoons. I smiled at the server. Gracias, pero solo necesitaré entender. Ya no estoy compartiendo. Thank you, but I'll only need 1 fork. I'm no longer sharing. Ethan's attempts at damage control became increasingly desperate. Babe, let's talk about this privately. You're embarrassing yourself. The old Cassie might have acquiesced, might have followed him outside to hear explanations and justifications. The new Cassie, forged through 6 months of secret Spanish lessons and 1 evening of brutal truths, simply smiled. No estoy avergonzada en absoluto, I replied calmly. Pero tú deberías estarlo. I'm not embarrassed at all. But you should be. I turned to Marco, switching to English for the benefit of the others. Marco, I've always appreciated your kindness. I should note that while Ethan was disparaging me, you did attempt to defend me several times. That says something about your character. Marco nodded uncomfortably. I'm really sorry, Cassie. This isn't right. No, it isn't, I agreed, turning back to Ethan. Nuestra relación ha terminado. No hay discusión. Our relationship is over. No discussion. With those words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The anxiety and hurt remained, but something new emerged alongside them, a sense of power reclaimed, of dignity restored. You can't be serious, Ethan sputtered, his confident facade crumbling. Over some joking comments? Those weren't jokes, I replied simply. They were revelations. I should thank you, actually. Without your Spanish mockery, I might have continued investing in someone who fundamentally disrespects me. I stood up, placing my napkin beside my barely touched souffle. I'll be paying for my portion of the meal, I informed the table, removing my wallet from my purse and placing my credit card on the table. Consider it my final independent decision in this relationship. You're overreacting, Ethan insisted as I stood beside the table, credit card in hand. His voice had taken on the patronizing tone I now recognized as his go-to strategy when losing control of a situation. Everyone says things they don't mean sometimes. That's true, I acknowledged, my voice steady. But not everyone systematically insults their partner's appearance, intelligence, family, and career in a language they assume their partner doesn't understand. Our server approached, sensing the tension. I handed him my card. I'd like to pay for my portion, please. Just the scallops, sparkling water, and souffle. I've got the whole bill, Ethan countered, reaching for his wallet. Don't be ridiculous, Cassie. I insist, I replied firmly. Independence is apparently something I should have exercised more frequently in this relationship. Marco cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should give you two some privacy. That's not necessary, I said. I've heard everything I need to hear. And in perfect Spanish, no less. Several diners at nearby tables had begun glancing our way, their interest piqued by the obvious confrontation unfolding. I hadn't intended to create a public scene, but I refused to be silenced by fear of embarrassment. Let me make something absolutely clear, I continued, addressing Ethan directly. Tonight wasn't just about the Spanish insults. It was about recognizing a pattern that's existed throughout our relationship. I counted off points on my fingers. You consistently make decisions without consulting me. You regularly criticize aspects of my life while presenting it as helpful guidance. You've systematically isolated me from friends you deemed negative influences. And apparently, you've been planning our breakup while simultaneously planning a vacation together. That's not fair, Ethan protested, his confident demeanor cracking further. I've supported your career. I introduced you to my friends. I've been a good boyfriend. You've been a controlling boyfriend, I corrected. There's a difference between support and supervision. The server returned with my receipt. I signed it quickly, adding a generous tip despite the circumstances. As I tucked my copy into my wallet, I noticed Marco and Tara exchanging significant glances. You know what? I've seen this before, Tara said suddenly, addressing me. The Spanish comments, the criticism disguised as jokes. It's not the first time. Ethan shot her a warning look. This isn't your business, Tara. Actually, you made it her business when you dragged your friends to our anniversary dinner without consulting me, I pointed out. And then proceeded to mock me in front of them. Jason, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Not cool, man. Seriously, not cool. Oh, so you're taking her side? Ethan's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from neighboring tables. Because she's creating a scene over some harmless comments? They weren't harmless, Marco said quietly. I should have said something earlier. Lo siento, Cassie. I nodded my appreciation to Marco. Thank you for acknowledging that. Turning back to Ethan, I continued with remarkable composure. This isn't just about tonight. It's about realizing I've been making excuses for your behavior for a year. I've been working so hard to fit into your world that I've neglected to notice you've made no effort to enter mine. That's not true, Ethan protested, but his argument sounded hollow even to his own ears, judging by his uncertain expression. When was the last time you asked about my family without making some snide remark about their simple lifestyle? When did you last show genuine interest in my work beyond asking if I got that promotion that would come with a raise? I kept my voice level, more sad than angry now. A relationship shouldn't require one person to constantly diminish themselves to make the other feel superior. A middle-aged couple at the next table nodded almost imperceptibly, the woman giving me a small, encouraging smile. I think we should talk about this privately, Ethan tried again, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of our confrontation. There's nothing more to discuss, I replied with finality. I wish you well, Ethan, but I deserve better than what you've offered. I gathered my purse and the wrapped watch I'd planned to give him, which now seemed like an artifact from another lifetime. Without further comment, I turned and walked toward the exit, my stride purposeful despite the trembling in my knees. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped outside, bringing both relief and reality. I had just ended my year-long relationship in spectacular fashion. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to ebb, leaving space for the hurt to seep back in. Not hurt over losing Ethan, that already felt right, but hurt over having invested so much in someone who valued me so little. Instead of hailing a rideshare immediately, I decided to walk for a while. The Seattle skyline glittered against the night sky, streets still busy with weekend activity. I moved through crowds of people enjoying their Friday evening, anonymous in my elegant dress, carrying the weight of my new reality. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse. I finally checked it 6 blocks from the restaurant, unsurprised to find multiple texts from Ethan. You're being childish. Come back so we can talk like adults. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. You're overreacting. This is why I can't talk to you about things. You get emotional. Fine. Be that way. I was going to break up with you anyway. I didn't mean any of that. Please call me. The progression from accusation to anger to pleading was so predictable it almost made me laugh. I silenced my phone and continued walking, eventually catching a rideshare back to my apartment. Once home, I kicked off my heels and stood in the center of my living room, suddenly seeing the space through new eyes. Evidence of Ethan permeated the apartment, his spare toiletries in the bathroom, several changes of clothes in my closet, the expensive coffee maker he'd insisted I needed. More subtle were the changes I'd made to accommodate his preferences, rearranging furniture for better flow, replacing my colorful throw pillows with his preferred neutral tones, storing away family photos he found cluttered. With methodical determination, I began collecting Ethan's possessions. I found a cardboard box in my storage closet and filled it with his items: clothes, toiletries, the spare key he rarely used, books he'd lent me but I'd never enjoyed. I worked with quiet efficiency, removing traces of him from my space, while mentally cataloging the ways I would reclaim it as fully mine. His barrage of texts continued, eventually shifting to calls that I declined. Around midnight, the tone of his messages changed again. You're making a huge mistake. No one else will understand you like I do. You'll regret this when you calm down. Did you really waste 6 months learning Spanish just to spy on me? That's psychotic. That last message confirmed I'd made the right decision. His inability to recognize his own behavior as problematic while characterizing my language learning as deceptive revealed the fundamental disconnect in how we viewed respect in relationships. I blocked his number and his social media accounts, not out of spite but self-preservation. Whatever closure I needed wouldn't come from further interaction with Ethan. It would come from rebuilding the confidence I'd surrendered incrementally throughout our relationship. As I placed the box of his belongings by the door for eventual return, I found myself speaking aloud in Spanish, testing the freedom of using this skill for myself rather than for him. Merezco más que esto. Merezco respeto y honestidad. I deserve more than this. I deserve respect and honesty. The words felt powerful in my mouth, a declaration of self-worth in the language that had revealed the truth about my relationship. 6 months of intensive study had given me an unexpected gift, not the connection to Ethan's world I'd sought, but the clarity to recognize I needed to leave it. 3 months after that fateful anniversary dinner, I found myself sitting in a sunny cafe, conversing easily in Spanish with my tutor Alicia. What had begun as language lessons had evolved into genuine friendship, with our weekly meetings now focusing as much on conversation as conjugation. Tu español ha mejorado mucho, Alicia commented, stirring her cappuccino. Your Spanish has improved so much. Gracias. Es más fácil aprender cuando lo haces por ti misma y no por alguien más, I replied with a smile. Thanks. It's easier to learn when you do it for yourself and not for someone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd begun Spanish lessons to connect with Ethan, only to discover the language would instead free me from him. Now I continued studying for my own enrichment, finding unexpected joy in the melodic sounds and expressive phrases that were becoming increasingly natural to me. My apartment had transformed alongside my perspective. The day after our breakup, I'd painted my living room the vibrant teal I'd always wanted but Ethan had dismissed as too intense. I'd restored my eclectic throw pillows, hung colorful artwork, and positioned family photos prominently on shelves. Every change, no matter how small, represented reclamation of my space and identity. My phone chimed with a text from Tara, who had reached out a week after the restaurant confrontation. Our coffee meeting had revealed her own growing discomfort with Marco's relationship with Ethan, particularly their Spanish exchanges that excluded others. While Marco wasn't nearly as demeaning as Ethan, he'd enabled the behavior through participation and silence. My stand had prompted Tara to have difficult conversations with Marco about respect and inclusion, ultimately strengthening their relationship. Book club tonight at 7. Don't forget to finish the novel, her message reminded me. Who would have imagined that from the ashes of my relationship would emerge new friendships? The book club had formed organically when Tara introduced me to several women in her circle, creating a monthly gathering centered around literature, wine, and increasingly deep conversations about relationships and self-worth. Professionally, the energy I'd previously directed toward accommodating Ethan now fueled career advancement. I'd successfully pitched a comprehensive rebranding strategy for our primary client, earning recognition from senior leadership and a promotion to marketing strategist with a substantial raise. The confidence I displayed in presentations now came naturally rather than requiring the mental pep talks that had preceded professional interactions during my relationship. My newly decorated office featured a small framed quote, "Never again will I silence myself to make others comfortable." It served as daily reminder of the lesson learned through painful experience. Walking home from the cafe, I passed the watch store where I'd purchased Ethan's anniversary gift, the one he never received. I'd returned it the week after our breakup, using the refund to book a solo weekend trip to Vancouver where I'd practice Spanish with tourists and locals alike. That small act of independence had sparked a passion for solo travel, with plans now forming for a 2-week exploration of Spain the following spring. Approaching my apartment building, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. My stomach tightened momentarily before relaxation returned. This encounter was inevitable in a city where our social and professional circles occasionally overlapped. "Cassie," Ethan said, straightening as I approached. He looked essentially the same, handsome, well-dressed, confident, yet somehow diminished in my perception. "Hello, Ethan," I replied neutrally, stopping at a comfortable distance. "What brings you here?" "I was in the neighborhood for a property showing," he explained, though we both recognized the transparent excuse. "Thought we might talk." "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "It's been 3 months." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to my direct approach. The Cassie he'd known would have accommodated this unexpected visit, invited him up for coffee, listened to whatever explanation he'd crafted. "You look good," he offered, eyes taking in my casual confidence, the highlights I'd added to my hair, the relaxed posture that had replaced my former tension around him. "Thank you," I replied simply, without returning the compliment or diminishing my own worth with self-deprecation. "I've been thinking about what happened," he continued when I didn't fill the silence. "I wasn't at my best that night. The things I said in Spanish, I didn't mean them." "I think you did," I countered calmly. "And that's okay. They helped me recognize fundamental incompatibilities between us." Ethan frowned slightly, clearly expecting a different response, perhaps lingering anger he could label as emotional, or wounded vulnerability he could exploit to re-establish connection. "Everyone makes mistakes, Cassie. Relationships require forgiveness. They also require respect," I replied. "Something I've learned to prioritize, both from partners and myself." The subtle shift in his expression confirmed what I suspected. This encounter wasn't about genuine remorse, but about re-establishing control. The realization produced no anger, only clarity and a touch of compassion for someone who measured relationships in terms of power rather than partnership. "I should get going," I said, stepping around him toward the building entrance. "I wish you well, Ethan. Genuinely." He looked momentarily startled by my composure, perhaps realizing for the first time that I had moved beyond both his influence and the pain he'd caused. "That's it? After a year together?" I paused, considering his question seriously. Sometimes the most valuable thing we gain from relationships is the wisdom to recognize what we don't want. I'm grateful for that lesson. Without waiting for his response, I entered my building, the security door closing definitively behind me. The encounter left me feeling neither vindicated nor upset, but simply certain of my worth and the boundaries I would maintain to protect it. Later that evening, as our book club discussed the novel's themes of identity and resilience, I shared a sanitized version of my encounter with Ethan. The supportive responses from women who had become genuine friends reinforced the richness of connections built on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. "I have a friend who might benefit from your experience," said Melissa, a pediatric nurse with a thoughtful demeanor. "She's in a relationship where she's constantly walking on eggshells. Would you mind if I shared your story with her?" "Of course not," I replied. Sometimes hearing about someone else's journey helps illuminate our own path. This unexpected role as informal mentor to others navigating challenging relationships had emerged gradually. I didn't position myself as an expert, merely as someone willing to share hard-earned wisdom about recognizing subtle forms of disrespect before they escalate to obvious mistreatment. In my personal journal that night, I reflected on the 3-month transformation. The pain of betrayal had evolved into appreciation for the wake-up call it provided. The Spanish lessons intended to bridge distance between Ethan and me had instead connected me to a broader world and deeper self-understanding. The relationship that once seemed central to my identity now appeared as a necessary chapter in a much longer story of personal growth. El final de una cosa es el comienzo de otra, I wrote in increasingly confident Spanish. The end of one thing is the beginning of another. As I prepare to share this story, I wonder how many of you have experienced similar moments of clarity in relationships. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed your perspective about a partner? Did you stay or walk away, and what did you learn from that choice? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these personal journeys that remind us we're never alone in our experiences. Remember that sometimes the most painful revelations lead to the most profound growth. In my case, a betrayal in Spanish became the catalyst for reclaiming my authentic self in every language. Thank you for listening, and until next time, value yourself enough to expect respect from others.